Welcome to Crash Course in Commercial Real Estate. We converted our in-house training program to a podcast to teach you prospecting, negotiation, business planning, and other fundamental skills to become a successful commercial real estate agent. And now, here's your host, Brady Collier.
Welcome back. I'm Brady Collier. This is Commercial Real Estate Training, and today we're going to talk about the process of working with buyers. Yesterday we did, if you have a listing, and the process of getting a listing, and so we're going to flip that, and today we're going to talk about once you have all these listings out there and a buyer calls you, how do you work that process? What does that look like? So I only had 6 things with a listing. I came up with 9 on buyers. How many did you come up with, Joe?
I came up with 5 major headings, but then I think about 10 or 12 like sub pieces of those. So.
Well, let's dive right in. So you have a listing, and your listing is a downtown office building. Whatever aspect of commercial real estate it is, it doesn't really matter. It's pretty much the same process for all of them. So you have a listing, and it's a downtown office building. And so the first thing that happens with a buyer usually is you get a phone call. And so, Joe, just walk through with me. What's that phone call going to go like?
So you're saying that they've called me and said, "Hey,
you have a listing," and they call on your listing.
So I guess you're trying to kind of farm for information on who they are, what they're about, what they're doing, and then a lot of times you're sharing information about your listing because they've called about, "Hey, I saw your sign," or "Hey, I saw this on LoopNet or Crexy or whatever," and so I just want some more information. But as you're doing that, if you can get comfortable having a conversation with them about their business or about what it is that they do, then that gives you a chance to be able to highlight features of your building that you're trying to sell that may fit what they're trying to look for.
Several good things there. Let me interrupt you. He said several good things. When they call, you're going to do 2 things, and sometimes you're doing them simultaneous. But one is you're going to be giving them information because that's what they called for, and you want to sell your listing. But the other one is you're going to be gathering information. Through the process of giving them information, you're gathering information. And they're going to say, "Well, tell me about the building that I just drove past on 1212 Main Street." Well, it's an 8,000-foot office building. And you're going to hear, "Oh." Say, "Okay, well, what square footage are you looking for?" And that's where Joe said you're going to dig into what are their goals. Why are they calling? What kind of business do they have? This is a 8,000-foot office building. Oh, well, I really only need about 4,000 feet. Oh, okay, well, what kind of business do you have? And so Joe identified that right off the bat is you're going to have given them information and using that information to figure out what their goals are. Shannon, if they need 4,000 and you have 8,000 and it's not alignment, then why would you continue seeking their goals and asking them questions?
You might have another location
You might have another location, or if you don't have another location, then 5 of your friends out there in the commercial real estate space do have other locations, and you want to get face-to-face with them and represent them in finding, because if they're calling as a principal, you're going to get 2 kinds of calls. You're going to get calls from brokers and calls from principals. Brokers, what do? You give them the information. And maybe you ask them a few questions so you can tell your client who's calling on it. But with brokers, you give them the information, get off the phone. I'll email it to you. What's your email? Done. But if it's a principal, you drill in. You make the most out of that phone call. Anything else?
Yeah, because you never know. I think that's the beauty of being on the phone with people in our world, is that it's more of a spider web than it is linear. So there are multiple different ways out of any call, whether it's incoming or outgoing. There are multiple different ways where you can make money out of that if you're able to slow things down a little bit, get information, ask the right questions, and keep that conversation open-ended. So this doesn't work for you. What is it that you're looking for? Let's go help you find it. So tell me a little bit about what your use is. Tell me a little bit about what you do. That always helps as well, because you're doing the work qualifying your buyer as well, or qualifying your tenant if that's the case, so that as you go into the next step, they're a big, huge oil and gas company out of Houston. Okay, they probably got some wherewithal and they know what they're doing, versus, hey, I'm a so-and-so that wants to service ice cream trucks.
No, not only do they have the wherewithal, but they have a real need. The reason people are calling, there's tire kickers. There's always tire kickers, but you're going to learn to kind of discern, oh, that's a tire kicker, not spending any time there. But almost everybody who's calling on your listings, they have real needs. Kyle's number one client, we just got through talking about he makes most of his money off 3 to 4 clients every year. His number one client, he had a listing at Slide in the Loop. It was a big box. It didn't end up going anywhere. He made no money off of it. But somebody else called and wanted to see it. And then he converted that to a tenant rep assignment, and he's done like 25 locations for him around the country, 30,000 feet. So a huge assignment. But he converted them from calling on one of his listings into not just a customer, not just a client, but a friend. I mean, they send each other Christmas gifts. They meet. I mean, yeah, they're together all the time. So the first step is the call. That's what I had as number one. And then just like that voicemail that we just listened to in the prospecting video, the second step I have is the email. And so almost every one of the calls that come in on your listings, you're going to want to follow up with an email. Why do you do so, Joe?
Just so you can keep in touch, and that way you can send them more information. And it gives you a chance to follow up on something. Hey, I sent you this information, or you just wanted to circle back on this. Did you get a chance to look through that? Did you have any further questions? All of those next step kind of questions where you have another, I guess, an excuse for a touch point with them. Hey, sent you that. Just wanted to make sure it didn't wind up in your spam folder. Did you get a chance to look at that? Let's talk. So, and I put my first thing was meet/discuss with buyer. So I think all of this kind of fits into, you're having this sort of ongoing conversation where you're fleshing out or fishing out really all of their needs all at once. And so you're kind of saying, okay, just like you're helping them shop, so what are you after?
And so another reason I agree with that, you want to send them the info because that's serving your listing well. We talked about listings yesterday, and you're going to have your listing activity report where you're going to say emailed Joe Blow with ExxonMobil such and such space, and your client wants to see that you've been working with real people. So it's good for your client, but it's also good for you because when they say, should I give her my email? Yes, I want the information. They've extended a little bit of trust. Okay, I'm going to open up my life to you in just a little way. I'm going to give you something personal in my email. And that's one step towards, so that allows you to follow up. You have their information. You can start prospecting on them to see if you can represent them in some other commercial real estate. Because they're clearly interested in commercial real estate because they just called you on it. But that is a step towards number 3 for me, which is setting an appointment. So you're going to call. So they call. They drove past it. You're going to email them the information. You're going to call them back just like Joe said and said, hey, if you got that information, I'd like to set up an appointment to go and see that space with you. Or that space didn't fit. Hey, I found, I have 8,000 feet. You need 4,000. I've put together a list of 4 spaces in town that have 4,000 feet. I'd like to email that over to you, look at it. And then I was going to see if we could get together and look over it together and discuss your needs. And so now you're moving it from they called, you emailed, and you're moving it towards a face-to-face, and you're setting an appointment. So you're getting another level of buy-in, a little bit more commitment out of this buyer to working with you as their agent. Anything else on setting that appointment? And
all of that's going to give you an indication of whether they are just a tire kicker, like Brady said. It's going to give you an indication of their timing. A lot of times you get people that say, they call and they want all this information about your listing, and you kind of give it to them, and then as you're talking or as you're following up, it turns out that they're just kind of looking around for ideas for a move that they may or may not do a year or 2 from now. And so you don't want to take a huge ton of your time in the moment trying to get all this stuff teed up for them if it's not going to be a thing. But it's good information to know because that way you can call them in about 9 months and say, hey, we talked last year. It just gives you that extra touch point, exactly. And so I think with that you've also determined their timing, and you again qualify this client of yours to know if it's a real deal or if it's just something that you can waste a lot of time on. So
my number 4, and then I'm going to come back to you after this and see if you have any that are, you may have run a different list on your steps and how you process through a buyer. But my next one is a market tour. So they've called, you've emailed, you've set up an appointment, you've got a list of properties you want to go show this buyer, and then you're going to give them a tour. And that tour is going to go different depending on who they are. One really key difference is, are they from Lubbock? Because if they're from Lubbock, it's one kind of tour. If they're not from Lubbock, it's a whole different can of worms. And so, Joe, did you give the property tour on your sheet?
Well, I put before that I did a property search, and it kind of folds into that where, before your meeting, you've come up with 5 or 6 different possibles, and you send that to them, and you discuss it. Again, you're narrowing it down so that when you do your tour, you're not showing them a bunch of stuff that they're just not going to be interested in.
That's good.
You're not wasting your time, and you don't look like you have egg on your face. But I would say for a market tour that you really want to limit it to 3 or 4 locations max. I would think. Depending obviously, but generally speaking, I used to have a coach of mine who would say that if I can't show you I used to sell mattresses, and he'd say, if I can't show a client the right mattress in 3 mattresses, then I'm just not listening to them. And so I think that's the case, especially if you've done the pre-work of having those good conversations, and you're listening, and you're taking good notes, and you're asking some of those right questions. Then when you do show them a couple of spots, if they've been telling it to you accurately, giving you accurate information, then you should be able to hit pretty close to the bullseye with each of these 3, where the decision is, man, I love all of these, but this one's just the best, instead of, wow, that was a complete waste of my morning because none of those fit anything of what we were looking for. And sometimes you get that anyway, where someone says, well, I really need 4,000 feet. And then you get into a 4,000 foot space, and they go, oh man, this is just really big. And you go, oh shoot, well, all the ones I have are 4,000 feet. So let's take a step back. And so sometimes that happens anyway, just because people don't have accurate information or whatever. But if you're able to narrow that down really well, then it looks really, it ups your competence and confidence in you that they have. If you've said, okay, hey, I've identified these 3 that we're going to go look at specifically that I think are going to be bullseye stuff for you, I would say. But
So what would you say is the number one goal if you've got a person from out of town and they've come in and say they're looking at retail spaces, because that's a lot of what we do, and you're showing them the market? What's your number one goal in driving them around town in your car?
Take them to where it's happening,
Okay.
where there's a lot of traffic and it looks nice.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I don't know that it's the right answer, but it was a good answer.
Thank you.
Because I would say your number one goal is to build their trust and their engagement. Because when you take them to 114th and Quaker, and that's where everything is happening, but that's not where it's happening for them, because they're more about student and so on and so forth, and you didn't know. So the way that I think you build the most confidence is when you have them into the office and say, hey, I'd like to take a tour of Lubbock, meet at my office and say, hey, before we hop in the car, let me just show you Lubbock real quick. I just want to orient you to the market. You say, this right here is where Lubbock started. This down here in 1924, Texas Tech and Overton, and this spread by decade up through here. And in 1972, they put in the loop, and retail has grown. And the South Plains Mall is right here, 1.1 million feet. And so now these demographics, household incomes are like this out here, but household incomes average, 50,000 in this area of the market. They average 70,000 in this area of the market. They actually average 90,000 in this area of the market right here. All the new development's been going like this, and so on and so forth. You tell them all of that in like 20 minutes. And they're like, okay, wow, I'm in the hands of somebody who really understands all the things that are going on. So then you say, let's just go get in the car. I want to drive around and just show you a few of those things so you can lay eyes on it. You put them in your car. They're sitting right there. You give them a market map. Say, now on this map, I've highlighted 3 or 4 different sites that we're going to see. But before we see them, I want you to just lay eyes on the market, make sure you understand the dynamics of it. And while you're driving and you've got them in the car, you're going to be like, okay, the major employers of Lubbock, the top 3 employers of Lubbock are Covenant Health, Texas Tech University, Covenant Health, and UMC. And they're all located in this area. So the medical district, downtown is right here. There's this many jobs in downtown. But then when you're driving back around, you're like, you see all these office buildings on the loop. You got a lot of daytime traffic right here. So if you're doing a food place, you may want a campus location, one by this daytime office. All this time, all you're doing is building credibility. I'm in good hands, and moving forward their engagement. And then you're asking them, what do you think about this area of the market? And you just continue this search for what's their ideal. So when you actually show them the space, you already know where they're going to go and what they need to do, because you've gotten into their business and you've built your credibility through an amazingly well-planned market tour. Thoughts on touring your client around the market?
Yeah, I would think that if it's an existing let's say it's an existing client from, Wichita, Kansas or whatever, then you may look at where they are in Wichita and say, this area to me reminds me of your X and X location in Wichita because it has this tenant, it has this tenant over here, it has these folks over here, good traffic through
Household
here.
incomes are about the same.
Exactly. And so it kind of gives them a frame of reference to go, okay, if I'm going to put a store or I'm going to put a location here, this is kind of where I'm probably going to land volume-wise or some of those other things.
And then you ask them a question like, is that Wichita location your number one performing location? No, actually, I've got one in Topeka, Kansas that way outperforms it. Oh, well, tell me about the I didn't see that one. Tell me about the demographics and the traffic patterns in your Topeka location, and tell me how they compare with your so on and so forth. So it's giving information, looking really smart, and then asking really good questions, and then letting them talk and really listening to them, like the mattress story, just really listening to their needs, their desires, what makes them successful. And if your clients are successful, they'll keep using you 1,000 times over.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's if somebody's out of town. If they're in town, you're probably just going to drive them and show them the sites because they know Lubbock, they understand it well, and you're still going to add value to them. You're still going to say, hey, this part of Lubbock, you already know this, but this part of Lubbock, because if I drew circles in Lubbock and I told you, Shannon, hey, could you tell me what the average household income is in 50th and Quaker? Could you tell me 114th and Quaker? Could you tell me 82nd in Milwaukee? And I give you these locations, what's the household income? Could you do that?
Not off the top of my head.
Not off the top of your head, but 2 months from now, you'll be able to do that. But most Lubbock people don't know that information. But that's really important to a retailer's success is density, demographics, household incomes, traffic patterns, and so on. The things that Lubbock people have a feel for, but they don't know the stats, you're going to know because then you're a value proposition to out-of-town clients. I represent, do the site selection work for HEB. And they were working with another broker, but I was developing a shopping center right next to him on 114th and Quaker. And I said, hey, let me go show you this other part of the market. He jumped in my car and he said he learned more in that one car ride than the past 3 years of working with his other broker about Lubbock. He fired that guy that day and hired me that day. And I've been working with him the last 4 years because of a great market tour where I proved value through knowing the market. So I would say that's a real critical thing because you moved it to face-to-face, established credibility. That's my step. Number 4, I am going to stop there and go to the next video unless you want to throw one more thing in.
No, I think it's a great cliffhanger.
Okay, great. Join us for the process with buyers, number 2.